My name is Anita Benefor, and I am one of the placement students from York University for a Safer Space. This week I will be talking about policing Black lives. This presentation is inspired off of Robin Maynard's book called Policing Black Lives. In 2017, she released this book, and she defines this as anti-Black racism in Canada as a systemic issue that erases the Black experience within Canada. The forms of erasure she highlights in her book show the erasure of the Black experience through all public realms of institutions such as primary, secondary, and post-secondary education. Throughout her book, she also highlights the racial disparities that continue to affect the mainstream perceptions of Black Canadians. She also highlights the ongoing anti-Blackness in Canada throughout her chapters on misogynoir in Canada, the miseducation of Black youth, and explains further how Black families, including Black youth, women, and men are affected through anti-Blackness. So, her work is divided into 8 chapters that discuss, it gives readers a critical understanding of systemic racism within Canada. She states that anti-Blackness often goes unspoken within Canada, and it is said to be more prevalent in places such as the US rather than in Canada. So Canada has this image as this friendly, nice country that, welcomes everybody with open arms, and we don't experience racism or that slavery never happened here, which is far from the truth. She states that Black lives have been exposed by a structural violence that has explicitly been condoned through multiple state-funded institutions such as prisons and the education system here in Canada, also through law and policy. She also states that the lack of awareness and education in anti-Blackness within Canada has made Canadian youth unaware of the history of nearly 100 years of separate and unequal schooling in the provinces that separated Black students from white students, which lasted until 1983. I didn't even know that. So that's interesting, and I'm sure a lot of people don't know that as well. Systemic racism. It has been an issue that has permeated Canadian society for decades. In a society where there is an inadequate education, law, and policy, there is also no wonder why racialized people continue to be at risk of being a victim to police service that is meant to serve and protect them. Historically, Black people in Canada have been subjected to inferior and less than human status throughout Europe and the Americas. Racialized groups are discriminated against in schools, housing, work, and in pay, so that survival becomes very difficult. When groups that are historically and continuously pushed out of the formal economy turn to the underground economies to survive, they are labeled criminals, welfare frauds, immigration frauds, and drug dealers. And this is an excerpt from Wigima's 2019 article. There are hierarchies within society deeming the white body as more superior than Black bodies. So Black people are seen as inferior, and this is reiterated through policies and different forms of anti-Blackness within our society. So, for instance, when you go to the airport, certain people may face certain discrimination at the airport, like the random stops, or even it was a policy that was abolished, I believe, in 2017, but it was the use of carding. And the problem with carding was it gave the police authority to stop anybody at any time in any location and take your information down and keep it in their system on the basis that you look suspicious. But the thing is that the police would hang out in low-income communities, typically where racialized people live, and they would harass them, take their information down. Sometimes this would lead to arrest. Sometimes, these men would get physical, or they would get abused by the police officers. It wasn't like they were going into more established communities, more upper-class communities in the city and doing this. They were stationed in areas that had higher crime rates. White individuals and white settler society profited from owning unfree Black and Indigenous peoples and their labor for hundreds of years while exposing them to physical and psychological brutality. And the inferiority ascribed to Blackness in this era would affect the treatment of Black persons living in Canada for centuries to come. So that is just a little bit on slavery in Canada. The brutal effect of slavery is most recognized in the States and the Caribbean. However, this erases the reality of the Black experience here in Canada. Due to the colder climate, the need for slaves was not as high and in demand, but the view on the Black body was still widely understood to be subordinate or to be used as an object and to be disposed of. So they pretty much dehumanized the Black body. Not just in Canada, this is a global phenomenon. This social amnesia in Canada has prevented us from tackling racist ideologies which are entrenched within our society. So I'm going to talk about some of the harmful stereotypes and tropes about Black people that were birthed during the slavery time, civil rights movement, and are still very actively present today. The mammy. The mammy was usually an overweight, dark-skinned Black woman who typically took care of the home and the domestic duties, and she also took care of the settlers and the colonizers' children. You can think of the Jemima, the Auntie Jemima pancakes and the syrup. The Black woman that is on the cover, that is an example of a mammy. We have the Mandingo. That is the animalistic, strong Black man, hyper masculine. He's not allowed to show emotion. He is not allowed to be soft. He has to kind of always be this strong, unhuman man. Then we have the Jezebel. The Jezebel is the hypersexualized Black woman. So this kind of birthed that ideology that Black women are promiscuous. The baby mama trope. Black women are irresponsible, and also it kind of plays into adultification. This is why Black young girls are seen as adults and not as innocent children, which then ties into how society views women and how they treat Black women in particular. I spoke about that in my previous video, adultification. The Sapphire is the sassy, angry Black woman. So I have some pictures as well of this. This trope is still very current in today's society. In a lot of TV shows you see on TV. So I can give you some entertainers as an example. Cardi B, even though she is not dark-skinned, she is still considered a racialized woman. She would fit that trope perfectly, actually. Then we have the hood rat. So the hood rat is a Black woman from an impoverished area who appears to be uneducated and oftentimes sexually promiscuous. She also comes in association with the baby mama trope. And then there's some other stereotypes as well. We have the Uncle Tom, who is a subservient Black man who lives for the approval of the white gaze. So I can show you a picture in my next slide. Actually, let me explain the two slides here. So the first image to your right is a mammy. And then the second one is Sarah Bartman. So this wasn't during slavery. It was afterwards. Early 1990s. No, not 1990s, 1900s. But she's a South African woman who was used as she was used as entertainment. So they would put her in they would use her as like a display for people to come and see her. She was in a cage. She was raped. She was abused. She actually died from, I think, a sexually transmitted disease. But yeah, because of her body shape and the way her bum was really large, they used her as some sort of caricature or a I want to say, yeah, they treated her like an animal, pretty much. She is commonly known for being exploited all throughout Europe for her body. Bartman was paraded around in freak shows in London and Paris, with crowds invited to look at her large butt. Sarah died at the age of 26, and some of her body parts were preserved in jars and displayed in Paris's Museum of Man. They remained on public display until about 1974. So that just shows you how disposable she was to the community. They did not care about her. She was not human to them. They really, really had her out on display and did not care for her well-being. So here we have some other tropes. We have the Uncle Tom to the right. and then we have the Jezebel and the sassy Sapphire. The media and their role in policing Black people. They play a key role in how racialized bodies are perceived through negative stereotypes, which further marginalizes us and affects us psychologically. Mainstream media plays a major role in the portrayal of the Black community as criminals. This feeds lawmaking, the criminalization of using and selling drugs, which directs the grounds policing practices, which like carding, surveillancing, low-income housing, which then further feed the rhetoric in the never-ending loop that invents Black criminality and then uses this construction to rationalize and justify violence against Black people. The more criminalization of Black people is shown in our media, the more police violence is justified. So on the right, there's some statistics. So the Black criminal man stereotype. The Journal of Alcohol and Drug Education did a study asking people to envision a drug dealer and describe the person. 95% of the respondents described this person as a Black person. But in reality, Black criminals only make up 15% of drug users, while the percentage remains higher for drug users as white people. Human Rights Watch reported in 2000 that in 7 states, Blacks constituted 80 to 90% of all drug offenders sent to prison. The majority of illegal drug users and drug dealers nationwide are actually white, but only 3/4 of the people imprisoned for the offenses are Black and Latino. So Black youth were 3 times more likely to have sold a illegal substance and jailed over their white counterparts. White youth actually were using 3 times more and were in the emergency for drug-related incidents. So it's interesting the way the media perceives this, or people perceive Black people and criminality. So here we have some other common stereotypes of Black people. The sassy, overweight Black woman. If not playing in some sort of servant maid, many times African American women and men are cast as mothers or grandmothers that are very loud and bold with a take no crap attitude. And then here are some examples of them. We have Queen Latifah in Bringing the House Down, Tyler Perry, Diary of a Mad Black Woman, Martin Lawrence, Big Mama's House, and Eddie Murphy, The Nutty Professor. Some other stereotypes are the magical, consisting of or looking for a spiritual superpower, usually to help their white counterpart, often uneducated with informal speech. Some examples of this in film are Dick Halloran, The Shining in 1980, John Coffey, The Green Mile in 1998, Papa, Justify and White, The Skeleton Key in 2005, and Miss Cleo from the infomercials in the 90s. Another stereotype is just somebody that is ghetto. Drug dealer, ex-con, street hustlers, or even just living in the inner city. Blacks often play gritty characters using informal English just trying to better themselves. If not trying to better themselves, they are put in off-the-wall situations to play contrast or opposite to someone else who is usually white. Some examples of this are Eddie Murphy in 48 Hours, Flavor Flav in Under One Roof, and Wesley Snipes in New Jack City. Another stereotype is servants, often found in movies. African Americans play the butler, the maid, the bellboy, secretaries, or waiter in white movies and TV shows. Some examples are Mammy, Gone with the Wind in 1939, Juanita in Billy Madison in 1995, and Aunt Jemima from the TV commercials. So the pancake mix and the syrup, which they actually recently, after the whole Black Lives Matter movement with the brands last June, they actually got rid of the name and changed the logo for the brand. Another stereotype that is common is the athletic Black boy. Very athletic, or the ability to run fast is common for Black roles in film. This character is usually very boisterous, openly admitting their athletic skills. Basketball is the most common sport that we see portrayed by Blacks, but football, baseball, and track and field are also used. Some examples of this are Jesus Shuttlesworth from He Got Game, Wesley Snipes in White Man Can't Jump, and Cuba Gooding Jr. in Jerry Maguire. So here are some stereotypically Black strong woman leads in TV and film. We have Olivia Pope from Scandal. We have a character from Black Panther. I don't remember her name right now. We have Annalise from How to Get Away with Murder, and then Whoopi Goldberg. She typically plays these roles in her films anyway. Moving on to racial profiling. This occurs when law enforcement or security officials consciously or unconsciously subject individuals at any location to heightened scrutiny based on or in part on race, ethnicity, aboriginality, place of origin, ancestry, or religion, or on stereotypes associated with any of these factors, rather than objectively reasonable grounds to suspect that person is implicated in criminal activity. Black people make up 8% of Canada's population, but in Toronto, approximately 37% of police brutality. Black people are 20 times more likely to be shot and killed by the police than their white counterparts. If that is not insane, I don't know what is. Racial profiling, shopping while Black. I just did a presentation on this, so if you want more information, you can go back and watch that video. But anyways, racial stigma in retail setting impacts the consumptive process for Blacks in two central ways. First, retail settings are often sites where anti-Black bias is made evident, requiring Black shoppers to navigate racial hierarchies while procuring goods. Secondly, discrimination alters the experience of shopping, arguably raising the cost and reducing the rewards derived from consumption. When a store's sales staff is hesitant to serve Black shoppers or suspects that they are prospective shoplifters, shopping no longer becomes a form of leisure. So again, the Black experience shopping is very different for people who don't have to experience these sort of things, people who don't even have to think about these things. When you go into certain stores as a Black person, you have to think about your setting. You have to think about the ratio between you and the staff who are not racialized, because oftentimes, especially in like luxury stores or designer stores, they will follow you around, or there's this assumption that, you know, you're coming into the store to steal because you can't possibly afford these items. So shopping in a sense becomes a chore. It's not something that is a leisure activity for most people. You know, you have to worry about somebody being behind your back and following you or accusing you. And nothing is worse than when you purchase something and the cashier forgets to take off the tag. You're walking out of the store and the alarm goes off. Because then now people are looking at you like, hey, I knew, like it almost it reinforces their stereotypes of you, like, oh yeah, I'm sure she was stealing, that's why she was here. But to the right, there's a picture of a Black boy who was actually arrested at one of their luxury department stores in New York called Barney's for purchasing a belt, but they assumed that he stole it. So this was a whole big issue. He actually had a lawsuit against Barney and he ended up winning over $500,000. Shopping while Black continued. Blackness cheapens the brand image. A qualitative assessment of Blacks' reports of racial stigma and discrimination in retail settings reveals that race can change the meaning and status attached to goods when they are sought out or owned by racial minorities. This is from Pittman in 2020. So pretty much the association of Blackness in consumerism distorts branding and status, specifically when Black people are involved. However, when non-Black people consume and partake in Black culture, it is redefined as marketable, exclusive, and held with the highest regard. So this kind of segues into cultural appropriation. This occurs usually when the race in power, white, takes on elements of another race's culture to their consumption. They don't receive the negative labels or have to face the same negative stereotypes as those from those races. So here we have two women. There's a white woman with braids walking down a fashion runway, and her braids are considered high fashion. And then to the right, there is a Black woman with the same braids, and typically when Black women wear their hair in these styles, it's considered non-professional, ghetto, or just it's not acceptable to the European standard of beauty. Jay-Z versus Cristal. So this is an interesting case study. The managing director of Cristal, Frederic Roussard, expressed his grievances with rappers endorsing his champagne brand in a 2006 article with The Economist. He stated that you know, he views the attention with curiosity and serenity, and suggested that these rappers actually drink from other brands. When asked about whether associations with rappers could affect his brand, he stated, "That's a good question, but what can we do? We can't forbid people from buying it. I'm sure Dom Perignon or Krug would be delighted to have their business." For him, the association with rappers came with negative connotations for the brand's image, despite rappers making it a household name in the late 90s and early 2000s. Nobody was drinking Cristal before Jay-Z, Notorious B.I.G., P. Diddy made it a thing and a household name. They spent so much money on the brand, but the brand owner himself did not want to be associated with Black people and Blackness. So he made those comments. So what did Jay-Z do in response? He said that it has come to my attention that the managing director for Cristal, Frederick Roussard, views hip-hop culture as unwelcome attention. I view his comments as racist, and I will no longer support any of his products through any of my various brands, including the 40/40 Club, nor in my personal life. So what Jay-Z did was made lemonade out of lemons. He created Ace of Spades champagne. This sparked Jay-Z's most successful business venture/investment with the Armand de Brignac champagne brand from Sovereign Brands. Ace of Spades is currently a global household name in the luxury champagne brand sphere. So, he pretty much just made his own thing. And now this is the luxury drink of choice for rappers and other successful Black people. Not only for Black people, for everybody. But yeah, Jay-Z just said, okay, if you guys don't want us using your products, we won't. Police carding and street checks. Toronto journalist Desmond Cole has made a documentary called The Skin We're In, highlighting his experiences with police discrimination and carding. He is quoted to say, "I have been stopped, if not always carded, at least 50 times by the police in Toronto, Kingston, and across Southern Ontario. By now, I expect it could happen in any neighborhood, day or night, whether I am alone or with friends. These interactions don't scare me anymore. They make me angry. Because of that unwanted scrutiny, that discriminatory surveillance, I am a prisoner in my own city." How carding began in Toronto. The police practice of documenting the personal details of encounters with citizens, usually with no charges laid, has had many names since the 1950s. Back in 1957, Toronto police were given actual cards called suspect cards to document and forward information about persons of interest to detectives. Over the years, carding became a form and later a report. By 2015, the practice was called community engagements, but its term carding stuck and still involved random stops of citizens and collection of personal data, including details of physical appearance, address, and contact information. So I believe in 2017, they actually stopped with this practice. However, there's officers that are still currently practicing it under different guises. But again, I spoke about this earlier. It is very unfortunate that officers stationed in low-income housing areas typically will hang out there and then stop young men, boys, older men who they deem as suspicious. This is highly discriminatory, very racist, and a lot of people are sick of it. There's been a lot of interactions with the police where things have gone physical. People have actually been arrested over their authority to card people over the years, and I guess people just had enough of it, so it was definitely abolished, and I'm using that with quotations, but there's officers that still abuse their power and still do this, but don't call it carding. Low-income housing communities. Marginalized communities are strategically disadvantaged through city planning and zone regulation when it comes to access and shopping. Black consumers' disadvantage in the marketplace is due to part social structure conditions, such as residential segregation and the organization of the marketplace. So think of communities like Jane and Finch versus communities like Bridle Path and Yorkville, and the stores that are in those neighborhoods. If you were to go to Jane and Finch, there's a really big No Frills. That No Frills typically doesn't have the freshest produce. A lot of the times things could be expired in the grocery store, but things are sold at a cheaper rate than they would be sold in Yorkville or in Bridle Path. You will never see a Whole Foods in a low-income community housing neighborhood, but you would see that in Yorkville. You would see that in Bridle Path. You will see that in certain areas of Richmond Hill and Woodbridge. Why? Because, low-income community housing people typically cannot afford to purchase groceries from stores like that, so they purposely keep those healthier options away from oppressed people or impoverished people. It's like they kind of push them out to the outskirts of the community or outside of society, and then they leave them with little access to healthier options. There's junk food, there's tons of fast food chains in low income community housing, whereas when you get into the more developed neighborhoods, the more rich areas, you have vast variety of juice bars, of salad bars, of gyms and community centers that are actually well equipped, state of the art facilities. But yet in low income communities, you have community centers that don't have enough staff, are lacking in equipment, in adequate TVs and, resources for the children to use. And that just says a lot about how society views people who are in poverty. Retail space and Black dollars equal status and purchasing power. Retail venues also function as a symbolic site where Blacks have struggled for full inclusion and racial equality, in part because of the utility of goods as signifiers of status. Boycotting stores and brands isn't a new trend. It dates to the civil rights movement when Black communities withheld their spending and support of local businesses to regain their power while fighting racism and discrimination. So again, this ties back to, the association with Black people and high-end brands. A lot of these brands don't like when, Black people start wearing their stuff because they associate cheapness with us. They associate negativity with us. They associate, if so-and-so is wearing my products, it's going to bring the overall look down. But it's okay for them to, pick and choose different aspects of our culture and our communities and, make it a costume for them. And then when they do that, it's seen as fashionable and, high fashion, or it's seen as a trend. Black Lives Matter, Canada. So Black Lives Matter originated in the US and has gone to be a worldwide movement to bring attention to the injustices experienced by Black people. Their objectives are to dismantle all forms of anti-Black racism, liberate Blackness, support Black healing, affirm Black existence, and create freedom and love and self-determination. It's also there to dismantle all state-sanctioned oppression, violence, and brutality committed against Black communities. Their struggles are tied up with the struggles of Indigenous people of the land in which many of our ancestors were brought and forced onto brutalization, the living apocalypse. There is also no Black liberation without Indigenous liberation on Turtle Island. Black Lives Matter Canada is the result of insistence on working towards a future where Black people living within and across colonial borders on stolen land are no longer denied their humanity. Black Lives Matter Canada exists to create resources to support and to mobilize around affirmation for all Black life. So although Black Lives Matter is something that is supposed to be uplifting for racialized people, specifically Black people, there's a lot of critiques on Black Lives Matter. A lot of people, white people, who don't support Black Lives Matter feel the need to, ask, don't all lives matter? And the thing is, when Black people are saying Black Lives Matter, they are not saying white lives don't matter or any other lives don't matter. They're just highlighting the fact that their lives matter too. There's so many things that go on in society, and it's like everybody kind of everybody kind of looks the other way because it's normal, and that's not okay. So Black Lives Matter is simply saying we matter too. We should be treated fairly, just as white people are, just as other communities are. That is all they're saying. Anyways, elitists and classists People believe that it is an elitist and classist movement, as the representation is mainly by the most educated people, Black people within that group. They also believe it is an anti-establishment and anti-police, because they do believe in the abolition of police. They think that police evoke way too much harm and brutality on Black people, given the stats and things that have happened. Example, George Floyd, and countless other situations that have not been televised to that level. So they think that getting rid of the police and actually getting community leaders that are understanding of the Black struggle and Black people would be better equipped to deal with crime and different things. However, a lot of people don't agree with that. And they also believe that the Black Lives Matter movement is a form of reverse racism. Reverse racism is racism towards white people by people of color. So what are some solutions? Some solutions to this are: the government should put more funding into public housing and enjoyment opportunities and less on the police. So put more funding into low-income communities so that people don't have to struggle. Defund or abolish the police. Dismantle and reassess the role they play in society and the harm they enact on racialized groups, and create a new system which focuses on protecting and rebuilding through finding better solutions for marginalized communities. So less criminalization of Black and brown bodies and more unification. Black Lives Matter also wants to end systemic racism through creating policies and laws which center racialized people's experiences and best interests. Also creating spaces for racialized people to have a seat at the table in councils, cabinets, and high levels of government leadership. Also, legitimately holding the police accountable for killing racialized people, because this happens so often where they kill somebody, there is video surveillance, there is evidence, and yet they go scotch-free or they go home with pay, while the family of the victims don't get any justice. Paying reparations also as a starting point to rectify generational trauma enslaved and Indigenous people of Canada have faced. We are at the end of my presentation, and I just want to close off with a quote from Wes Hall. "A system that oppresses Black people is not a problem for Black people to fix. It is the gatekeepers of the system, and those gatekeepers who fail to act must be moved aside. We need to chart a new course where the need for voices like mine is obsolete, where there is no need for our youth to march into the streets and to demand our attention." Here's a picture of white people holding signs in support of Black Lives Matter. And one of the signs says, "White people must do more." Thank you for listening. Thank you.